Hi everyone, welcome to the TechHub.training PowerAutomate Auto Authorizing Challenge Solution. In this challenge, we were tasked with specifically going through some information and checking whether or not the trip was approved, if it was approved, when that was, or if it was not approved at all. So in this challenge, we had specific criteria given to us. The criteria being, first, if the initial costs were no more than $1,000, and if the trip length was one or less days in duration. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Excel sheet in order to figure out where all this information is coming from. So here we have 59 trips listed over here, listed out by trip ID. And we have employee ID, the employee who was going on the trip, the destination ID, where that destination was, the start and end date, the request date that this trip request was processed, and the estimated costs. You can see over here in column H and I that there are two columns with missing information all the way down the column here. And so what we are asked to do is specifically put yes or no in this column if the trip or the row ends up meeting that criteria that we had mentioned before, the $1,000 and the no more than 1 day length. And if it does meet that criteria, then we put in the date that it was approved. Because an employee had ended up deleting all the information that was in here before, we were told that the date that it was approved was 2 days after the request date. And then if the information or if the trip is not approved, then we write no here and we put a dash here. All right. So looking at this first column, you could go through and say, yes, this is approved, and then just add 2 days onto here. But, for some reason, a lot of employees seem to delete information. So we're going to go through the process here and do it in PowerAutomate. All right. So let's go ahead and check out our flow here. So you can see here, the very first thing I did was I set a variable to the file path location where that file is being kept. Since I move a lot of my files in and out of folders, I figured it was way easier for me to store it into some specific folder and get the whole path as a variable. That way I didn't have to change it if I ended up needing it elsewhere, because I also use it down here when I end up saving that Excel sheet. And so the first one I do is I just get the location, add it in here, and call the challenge by whatever the name of the file is that I download, and then I launch it in Excel. All right. I then read the Excel workbook and I store the information into what's called a data table variable. And this is basically just a whole grid. You can call it a 9x9 sheet where it's just rows and rows of data. It looks really similar to this, where each of these rows is an input of data. All right. So let's go ahead and jump down here. You can see that I set the variable of the row index to the value of 2 because I don't want to be pulling that first row, because I don't want to write anything into these two cells right here, H1 and I1, right? So I'm going to start on the second row, and then jumping into here, I'm going to touch back on the looping action in a second. I think it's easier if you start with the if-then statements and then come back to the looping. That way you determine it with just the first row of data, and then you go back and create a loop for it in order to check all the information going down the row or going down the column. Because if you end up screwing up in here, then the whole thing ends up messed up, and it's way easier to just mess up with only one cell rather than 59 other cells as well. So let's go ahead and check out the if-then statement. So in here, I'm looking at this first row and I'm saying the estimated cost, I want it less than or equal to 1,000. And if it is, then I go to the end date and current date, calculate the days in between them, and then I store that into another variable called time difference. And then right here, I check to see if that time difference is less than or equal to 1. And so I'm seeing if that duration of the trip is 1 or less days. So coming into here, if it meets both these criteria, then I write yes into column 8, which is H2 in this case, starting off. And then I add the date and time. I add 2 days to the request date. And then I write that information into the I column of that current row and it's, in this case, with this first row, what it'll end up being is it'll be 2 days on top of that. All right. So February 1st in this case. So let's go ahead and look back at the flow again. If it does not meet that criteria on that statement right here, what it's going to end up doing is it's going to write no in that cell in H, and then it will put a dash in the column right next to it for the date approved. And so coming down here, I have the exact same information laid out again, just in case if it doesn't meet the estimated cost of $1,000, then it automatically jumps down here into the else then and continues on. All right. So after this, I increase the row index by 1, and then I keep going down here. So with the current item in the Excel data, what this is doing is it is iterating over each data row inside this data table that I have as my variable here. I store the data row into the current item, and I keep going down the line. At the very end, I end up closing the Excel sheet, and I save it under this new name of authorizing-complete.xlsx, and then I close that whole sheet out. And so it's saved in the exact same spot as where my previous file was, because I use the same file path, and then I just change the name. All right. So coming back over here to this looping can be done a number of different ways. And this whole sheet can be changed. This whole flow can be changed as well. You probably don't even need the row index, but I like having it in there because I can see if I start doing a run next action, I do a step into each process, into each action, and I see what is happening at each step. And so when this variable right here ends up increasing, I can see automatically what row I'm on and what information is going to be put in before it gets put into that data cell in column H and I. All right. So you could change this, probably eliminate this, and use just current item all the way down in any place where I have row index as well. That is up to your choice. I like having it in there because it's, like I said, simpler and easier to see what's happening at each step. But if you feel really comfortable with PowerAutomate, go ahead and feel free to eliminate it and play around with it. I'd love to see what your guys' solutions look like as well. So please reply to the post on this challenge. Remember, it's the authorizing challenge with PowerAutomate. And so go ahead and post your solutions over there. I'd love to hear what you guys did and what you guys changed and found very interesting with PowerAutomate. Thank you guys and have a great time.